The title of today's message, however, is that we believe in creation. And so if you were to grab a physical Bible, right? And you were to open it almost directly in the middle, maybe just a little bit in front. The book that you would come across is a book called Psalms. And Psalms is the largest book in the Bible. It's in the Old Testament, and it's a creative work. These are songs. It's poetry. There are moments of people going through highs and lows and all kinds of details pointed out in its words. But there's one psalm specifically that speaks to the creation of this world. And what creation, without uttering a word, is trying to communicate to the people that would observe it. Okay? And so I'm going to read out Psalm chapter 19, verses 1 through 4, if you'd like to join me there. Psalm 19, verses 1 through 4.
And will you repeat what you just said about it, what it tries to do, show you for creation? I couldn't, sorry.
Without uttering a word, this what creation is trying to communicate to those who would observe it. And again, it's Psalm 19, verses 1 through 4. It says this. It says, "The heavens declare the glory of God." Excuse me. "The skies proclaim the work of his hand. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they display knowledge. There is no speech or language where their voice is not heard. Their voices go out into all the earth, their words into the ends of the world. In the heavens he has pitched a tent for the sun." If you were to go outside and find a place where there wasn't a lot of light pollution, right? Meaning there's just not a lot of light. It's completely dark. Like where we're going to be at the end of April. Okay? There's not a lot of light out there. You look up at the night sky, you'd see an array of lights that are tiny. They're minuscule pieces of what exists in this universe that we are from, right? And there are all different ways and arenas where we can get outside and see the beauty of creation around us. But for me, there's something unique and different about the stars, okay? So I want you to start thinking about moments in creation where you got out of this concrete jungle, right? And saw some of what was going on. Maybe it's the fall when the leaves start to change colors. And even in their death, you see the beauty, the wonder, and the majesty of a creator. Maybe it's in a fresh coat of snow that hits the ground. Maybe it's it's at the beach, or hearing the ocean, or the stillness of a lake. If I were to have a conversation with each one of us and ask you to stop and think, you could point to something where you've looked at creation and seen its wonder, beauty, and majesty. And there's a question that I think God wanted us to ask when he made the world to look like this. And the question is this just happenstance? Is this just a coincidence that the world came to be this way? Are we just fortunate and lucky that when we look at the night sky, the day, a tree in the fall, the snow in the winter, a beach, a lake, or the sand, that the aesthetics are simply pleasing to us? Or was there maybe a little bit more involved when God knit this world together the way that he did? Was he hoping, regardless of whether you were born in the U.S., where you would have the opportunity to attend a church, or if you were born in Iran, where if you communicate that, they put you in jail? This didn't just happen in some willy-nilly happenstance type of way. There is more in this. He was hoping that something else would scream out to you. We believe that creation screams. The Psalms and the Bible communicate that there is a creator. And in that creation, there is something prized, and he wants to communicate to us through what we see. That there is innate value and worth in what he has made. And we'll see there's one part of it that stands apart. It's set aside. It's different than anything else. I really believe that. In the church, with the best of intentions, some people have... My Lord. Give me a second. Sorry. No, I'm not thinking. So like I was saying, I believe that in the church, with the best of intentions, some people have focused on maybe a part of creation that wasn't as important, okay? But before I get into that, I want to tell you a short story to make that point. Has anybody in here ever heard of Kodak?
Of what?
Kodak,
Yeah.
the camera company? Yep, right. I should say who hasn't. But I don't want to isolate you like that, okay? Because that's not kind. Kodak is a company that produced cameras and film. Kodak is now significantly smaller than it used to be. What company is it? Who has photo albums, like the old school ones with the sticky pages? Yep. There's going to be some awesome 80s haircuts in there, right? But if you were to look at one of these photographs, more than likely it was taken using a Kodak camera on Kodak film, developed by Kodak with Kodak technology. They dominated the camera industry in the 70s and 80s, especially I think it was 1975. 85% of the cameras that were sold were Kodak cameras. And 90% of the paper that the pictures were printed on came from Kodak. Kodak dominated the market share until something came along that threw a really big cog into their whole dynamic. Does anybody know what that is? The digital camera. Now here's the fascinating point. Does anybody know who invented the digital camera? Kodak. Kodak invented the digital camera, which eventually became the very thing that brought their company to a far inferior place than it once was. And this is why. Kodak did not think that the digital camera would ever take off. Sure, it was wishful thinking because they dominated the market, but they treated it as a side project. They did not put their best technology into it, their best resources, and other companies came along and started to develop the digital camera, right? Kodak fell behind, and because of that, they are now a much smaller organization than they probably otherwise would have been. Yeah. And the reason all of that happened is because Kodak focused on the wrong thing. When you and I focus on the wrong thing at any point in our lives, it has the potential to be semi-drastic or even catastrophic. Okay? And I believe that in creation, when we have fought over how long it took for God to create the world, whether it happened over 6 literal days or it happened over a very long period of time, we have fought over the wrong thing. Now, I know some of you are thinking, yeah, but if the Bible teaches that, we should hold to it. And I 100% agree with you. But let me show you why I say this. If you were to go to Genesis 1, and read through the account, the Hebrew word, which is in the language the Bible was written, is a word called yam. And yam can be used to designate a 24-hour period. And that's what it is typically used for. More often than not, it describes a 24-hour period. But there is at least one instance that I know of. There might be more. I haven't yammed the entire Old Testament. Okay? So I apologize if I missed one. But there is an instance where the same word is used to designate a very long period of time. And so what I believe is that when we focus on yam, we've actually missed the greater point of Genesis, which I will get to in a moment. But in my study, I came across someone who believed in the 24-hour time period, and I love what they said because I think it's so pertinent to where we are and where we should be moving forward. This is what that author said. The truth is that both young earth and old earth interpretations rely on certain assumptions. Sincere believers debate the meaning of yam in the creation account because a case can be made on both sides. However, and this is the big part, this does not diminish the importance of what creation teaches us. And so what does creation teach us? I'd like to pose a thought, and then it is this. What if the creation narrative is less specifically about how it began and more of a testament to God's power and authority and the depth of love that he has for humanity? What if when Genesis was God breathed, the words of God given, he was less concerned with what you and I would believe about how long it took and more concerned with the power of who he is and the creation that came out of it? What if that is the detail that he would like you and me to be a little bit more concerned about? So what I want to do is I want to point out another Hebrew word that I believe in Genesis 1 is more important than yam. It's the Hebrew word bara. And it's found right there in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. A lot of you are familiar with that verse. It says, in the beginning, God created. Right? And it goes on. Let's paraphrase. Created is bara is the Hebrew word for created. And specifically what it means in this instance is created out of nothing. But what if the word bara here is more important? And the first thing it communicates is the power, authority, might, and strength of who God is. That all of this that we see, the beauty and the wonder, didn't just happen, but it was actually made by an entity that sits outside of space, time, matter, and energy. And it communicates. And that's what God wants you to know about. How powerful he is in the scheme of all these things. There's not really a way that this could have just happened by chance. And that's what Psalm 19 is about. Creation is trying to tell us that there is more. As we discussed last Wednesday, there's this version of the Bible called The Message, and it's written by Eugene Patterson, who was a pastor and a scholar. And he wrote it in a very controversial language that's very easy to understand, and it drives the dynamics in a different way. And I want to read to you how he interprets Psalm 19, verses 1 through 4. He says this: God's glory is on tour in the skies. God crafts an exhibit across the horizon. Madam Day holds classes every morning. Professor Knight lectures each evening. Their words aren't heard, their voices aren't recorded, but their silence fills the earth. Unspoken truth is spoken everywhere. That's a beautiful picture of how that is. When you see the trees, the leaves, the snow, the stars, the beaches, the lakes, the ground, the flowers, the colors, the rainbows, the beauty, the majesty. God is screaming silently to you that this didn't just happen. That something outside of it, something large, majestic, beautiful, and wonderful, created it. But here's the thing I would say. So let's say that we agree to that. The hard part becomes, okay, God is big, large, outside of all of this, but what does that mean for me? Because we all know people who are creatives, right? Who write, who create music, who make beautiful paintings or programs, and yet they're not so kind to their creation, or so kind to the people who experience their creation. You see, God can be big, large, majestic, and wonderful, but he also could be horribly mean and abhorrent to what he has created. So who is God? Is God like that? I think to answer that question, you go back to the very same section in Genesis. And what I love about this, if you're not familiar, Genesis is the first book of the Bible, so it's literally on the very first page, right? Everything is spoken into existence. God talks about his might and his power in bara. But on that very same page, he then speaks to his most prized creative order. And it comes about 25 or 26 verses later. And in those 25 or 26 verses, Genesis describes God making everything else, whether that happened literally in a 24-hour period or over a very long period of time. But then he gets to verse 27. And in verse 27, he speaks about what he created differently than he has spoken to about anything else. Okay? Genesis chapter 1, verse 27 says, "So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God he created them, male and female he created them." So God created mankind in his own image. In that one verse, bara was used to describe the immensity of God. And in this, he's using that to describe something different, something unique about this part of creation that didn't exist in those other 26 verses. When he talks about the stars, the trees, the plants, the animals, there is a uniqueness to what is happening in humanity at the moment. Right? There's nothing comparable to these humans that God is making at this point. Bara is referring to something sacred in the nature of humanity. Tim Keller, he talks about bara in this way. He says the Hebrew word for created, bara, in Genesis is a word that means created out of nothing. That first part we talked about. But also created for something. You see, in Genesis 1:27, the created takes on another point. And it wasn't about the animals, the trees, it was about us. And if you open to the New Testament, there's this book called Ephesians, where a guy named Paul, who was a follower of Jesus, very influential, planted churches, and was inspired by God to write these things that ended up becoming our Bible, right? In Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10, Paul writes, "For we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do." It's hope. The hope of God for everybody, that we are God's workmanship, that we are his master creation. And in that mastery, when he created you and he created me, he had a plan. And he had an agenda for you. To go down certain paths in your life that would lead to good works. He saw you, he stitched you together, and he said, you are uniquely made in order to fulfill this work. In order to fulfill this plan that I want you to walk into. This is what God thinks of you. We live in a world where it's very easy to cast people away when they've messed up or to throw them out. But God's response to us when we messed up was far, far different. And one of them is to make us unique in order to find a different type of good work. There's a unique, special relationship that God wants to have with you and with me. And it's one that no other part of his creation gets. And the reason he wants to have that is because we're made in his image. The fancy term is called imago Dei. And very simply, it means made in the image of God. Now, does that mean that we physically look like God? Probably not. God doesn't have a body the way that we do. Okay? But on the inside, the stuff that matters, there's something unique about you. And it's God's presence. And his form. And his character. As a part of who you are. And because of that, there's something different. In the Genesis account, before Adam and Eve ever take the fruit from the tree and it changes everything, there's a moment where it talks about how Adam and Eve walked in the cool of the evening with God in the garden. No creation was made to interact with God like that, except for you and me. This is what he wanted for us. Now they took the fruit and they ate that, and that changed everything. But the great reality is that humanity, God's prized creation, was not going to have to give up this type of relationship with God. Would it look different because of sin? Yes, it would. But God's whole plan after that is his desire to go after what he loves most. Because of the fact that we are made in his image, he cares about us. What we can learn from that Genesis account is that what was prized before the fall was still equally prized and loved after the fall. So many times we have relationships that break down because of what people do to us or what we do. And you know what? Sometimes that is appropriate. Right? In cases of abuse, in certain types of relationship, but God's relationship to us is different. There is no abuse that we could ever give him that would make him want to cast us away. Does he want us walking in sin and habitual patterns that are harmful to us? No, he does not. Right? Will he challenge you? Will he correct you? Will he make us go through hard things in order to try to win us back? Yes. But you are prized in God's eyes. And because of that, when you and I make mistakes, even before we ever know who Jesus is, God's desire is that we would turn toward him. To have a relationship with him first, so that he can show us who he is. And then we start to walk out some of the patterns of behavior that actually harm us and harm other people around us. We were prized, and it had nothing to do with the way that we behaved or interacted with God in a good manners type of way. So I have 5 statements I'm going to read to them. I'm going to read them all to you. And the first 4 are connected to these ideas that I've communicated so far. But there's a 5th one that I want to share with you all. Some of these are still in kind of a formation stage, but there is something unique about this final one. And I think maybe it's because it brings the whole idea, right? It says creation fell in the garden. Creation, the perfect world that we have, fell. And the very good world, which is how the Bible describes everything that God made. Okay? At the very end, he says he looked at it and it was very good. And so creation fell, and that very good world changed. But it is eagerly waiting for the day that it will be made right again. But in spite of it, and through all of that, creation is actually waiting for this day. When God is going to say, that won't have the last word. You exist in it now, but he's bringing about a day when he will restore what life was like before the fruit was taken from the tree. And we were thrown into this chaos. And we now have, and I think a lot of you are very theologically astute, right? You're going, how do you know that, Josh? What a great question. I'm so glad you asked. Another letter, that guy Paul that wrote to a church with the words that God wanted so that they could have them and you and I could have them. was to a church in a place called Rome, and this is what he said. He says, all of creation is waiting eagerly for the future day when God will reveal who his children really are. And Romans chapter 8, verse 21 tells us, for the creation was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the freedom and glory of the children of God. We all feel the weight of the curse. But God is such that when the curse hit, not only did he address it, but he also created a plan to bring us back to what it was that we lost. And I think we miss that so much because it's very easy in this world to feel like you're not special, like you're not unique. It's very easy to have the way of life, it's very easy to have the way that life hits us and breaks us down and then think in the scheme of the universe and creation how large it is and that we're so insignificant and small. But the truth is that that's a lie. You are unique. You are wonderful. You are crafted. You are beautiful. And I'm not just telling you that, right? I know I'm beautiful. I'm going to prove it to you. I'm not just going to say it to you. I'm going to prove it to you with some data. And this data wasn't brought out by one of these Christian seminaries, which is where you'd hear where you would expect to hear what I'm about to say. And this is how it ties in to Wednesday night, okay? But it's from a scientific community at Harvard. And it talks about the probability of you and me. Just in the understanding of biology, being born, and what a miracle that is, okay? So there's this doctor, and his name is Dr. Ali Benazir, okay? And he was a Harvard-trained data scientist, and he attempted to calculate the probability of any one person being born. Just using the biology of what it would take for you and me to be born. And I would share some of that with you, but we're going to try to keep it PG-13 today, okay? I think all of you know some of the details. This is what he said. The probability of you and I individually being born is 1 in 10 to the 2,685,000th power. Now, I'm assuming most of you in the room, like me, you read that, you have no idea what that number is, okay? That is a 10 followed by 2.7 million zeros. Okay? That's the probability of you and I existing. Right? And then, sometimes we think about the bigness, the expanse of the universe, and we feel like we're so little and we're so insignificant, but the probability of you existing is far more significant than the probability of the universe existing. I'm going to blow your minds today. This is what he said about the probability of the universe. There's an estimation that there are probably around 2 trillion galaxies in our universe. And each galaxy has billions to trillions of stars in it. I'll give you an example. We live in the Milky Way, right? We live in the Milky Way galaxy. The Milky Way has somewhere between 100 to 200 billion planets with 100 to 400 billion stars. And they believe that at a minimum, there are 2 trillion Milky Way galaxies existing. Not exactly Milky Way, but galaxies. Get it? All right. We're finding out more and more every day with Hubble, or whatever it is. It's out there scaling and mapping out the universe. And this is what he says. The probability of the universe existing as it does is 10 to the 24th power. So that is a 10 followed by 24 zeros. That is the probability of the universe. Is a 10 with 24 zeros. The probability of you and I existing is 10 to the 2.7 million power. You are a miracle in and of itself. And I'm not just saying that. That is statistically proven. I'm going to read for you the conclusion that they came to. The probability of your existence and my existence is so tiny that in comparison, the size of the universe is almost irrelevant. And I love this part. Your life is, mathematically speaking, an unimaginable miracle. Did you know that this is what God thinks of you and me? You are an unimaginable miracle. You are unique. You are special. And not like, oh, special, but no, you are special in the expanse of this massive thing where a creator said, I'm going to show you the might of my power. That's part of why I believe God made it so big. But also in making it so big, he wanted you to understand that in the expanse of what that is, it is nothing compared to you and me. Not in its ability to come about. 2.7 million zeros compared to 24 is inconsequential. But also in the bara that you were made in the creation, the special, unique plan that God preordained and hoped for and moves in order for you to find and to walk through. I don't care what the world says about you because I know the Creator and I know what He has said about you. And then I even know what secular scientists have said about you. You know what's fascinating? They're in agreement. And I know this world hits and it's hard and it hurts. And so I want you to let this be that salve that presses over you. Okay? It gets into those hard spaces. And be the thing that God starts to use to heal whatever the hurt or the hang up or the thing that's going on in your life. Because when He looks at you, when He looks at me, He sees 1 in 10 with 2.7 million zeros after it. And this is the greatest thing, right? So this all-powerful God thinks so much of you that when humanity fell in the garden, that He created a plan to go after you. Which is amazing in and of itself. But you know what else? You know what He didn't do? He didn't send an emissary. He didn't say, here's somebody to help figure it out. What God did was He decided to come Himself in order to get back what was lost from Him. I think a lot of people make judgments about God based on the suffering or the hard things of this world. And I want to tell you that is, I understand. It's understandable. It's very easy to do that. Okay? It's hard to work through some of that with God as well. But I'd like to suggest one other thing for you to consider, right? When it all went bad, God didn't send somebody else. He came Himself. Do you know what God's plan was to deal with sin and evil and the thing that separated you and me from Him? His plan was to let what was supposed to crush us crush Him, so that it wouldn't have to crush us. When the weight of the wrong that you and I participate in was swinging at us in order to take us out, Jesus said, I'm going to step in. And I'm going to let every single part of that fall on me. And do you know why? Because that's the way that you were created. He didn't do that for the trees or the animals. And listen, I love animals. I'm sorry. They hold no value comparably to you, okay? They don't. I'm not saying they aren't valuable, but you are created uniquely. And because of that, when everything got messed up, God's choice was to send Jesus, God himself, who created all of this, to take the brunt of what you and I could not take. So that when he does redeem it, and when death and decay are gone, we don't have to be separated with him. We get to be with him. And I'll close with this. So this is what I want you to do this week. It's very easy homework, okay? I want you to get in front of creation that speaks to you. My preference is outside, okay? You look at it on your screen, it's not the same. And I've seen some of those videos where they show the planets and the stars and the immensity of space. And maybe that's for you, okay? If that's for you, I want you to sit and watch that. And I want you to think about it. Remember, the probability of that is 1 to the 24th power. 1 to 10 to the 24th power. Right? Okay. And then the probability of you is 1 in 10 to the 2.7 million power. And then you ask God to speak to you about that. You ask him to say what it is that he thinks about you. Does God think that we have sinned and that we need to repent and turn away from it? He does. But even in that, it's because he's trying to bring about the best kind of life in this broken world until he comes back to get us and take us to the world where none of that will exist anymore. I think in Genesis, that word for created, which talks about the power of God and us being set apart, is actually the most important thing. And now this is tricky, because sometimes we wish that there was more, but the reality is the Bible is a book, okay? And it doesn't give us every detail. And here's what I mean by that. It tells us what we need to know about God. And that is what you need to know about God and yourself. Okay? And we believe at Dayspring that creation points to a creator. And that creator cares deeply about you. So Wednesday, I'm just going to preach this again. And we'll go from there.